Hello and welcome to Property Matters. I'm Stephen Galpin and today I'm going to be talking about construction industry, the materials and the future. Now, joining me on the programme is the Honourable Richard Evans, founder of Octavius GB and Anglo-Eastern Timber Alliance. Welcome to you, Richard.
Thank you very much. Lovely to see you.
Pleasure. Now, Richard, I've been in development for probably about 40 years, or it seems like 100 years, but it seems about 40 years. And I've seen turmoil and worry, but I don't think I've seen anything like we have today. We've got cost of living crisis. We've got service charges that were budgeted probably 2 years ago coming into effect now that are woefully inadequate and so are going to have to carry premiums. I've got builders around here in Canary Wharf that are shelving projects because they're frightened to put a spade in the ground because of the escalating cost of materials. We've then got the Eastern European situation, the war in Ukraine. We've got Russia trying to handle sanctions, and we've got the inevitable rebuilding after all this trouble. So I think my first question to you is this really going to be the hard hit for developers that it seems to be in terms of cost?
Absolutely. I mean, very uncertain times for sure. And considering, as you mentioned, Russia alone, and even sourcing materials from the Ukraine is extremely challenging because of the port situation. So very uncertain times and very sensible for developers to be extremely cautious.
Would you, I mean, if you were talking to a developer now, would you be able to estimate how long these price fluctuations are going to go on for? Is it 1, 2 years, 3 years? I don't know.
Well, as you know, the prices extended during COVID times. And for example, construction timbers went up nearly 4 times. Now we've come towards stabilisation, but there will be a slight increase in April time, they predict.
Okay. Now, with the shortages of materials, which are obviously what's putting up prices for this year, next year, what's the level of material that is taken from, say, Russia and perhaps Ukraine? What comes from where?
Well, as you know, before the war, a lot of the timber that we relied upon, including Russian birch that's put into plywood, for example, was plentiful. And now, obviously, that's restricted through the ban. That's created significant issues. And for example, a lot of the material that Turkey and also China were producing was originally from Russia. So that's had a huge impact. But funny to say that Russia's only down 25% in their timber sales, but we're the ones that are suffering.
So would that be timber going to China for processing, or?
Yes, it would.
Yeah,
it's processed in China and then comes back. So it's created a real issue and an opportunity for the Swedes.
I was just going to say that. Just mentally, you always tend to think of wood coming from Sweden or those Scandinavian countries. Are they filling the gap?
Well, they are filling the gap, but at the same time, everyone's affected by the energy crisis. So they're in a very strong position. But also it's an opportunity for people like myself to source new materials from China, for example. Yeah. That's just one example.
Okay. So actually we've got two factors here, haven't we? We've got the sanctioning of materials from certain countries, and predominantly Russia. And then on top of that, we've got the energy costs that are required to process these materials afterwards. So it's a double whammy, really, isn't it?
It is, and it's affecting obviously not just timber, but a lot of manufacturers are closing down their lines and are being incredibly selective how they...
What would that apply to? Plasterboard, that sort of thing? Or?
Yes, absolutely. Plasterboard and many other materials. So not just timber, but throughout the whole process.
So looking at the immediate future, what do we think the price increases are going to be over the next few months and better part of this year?
Jewson's, I remember, predicted around 20% for this year. And if you speak to our timber experts, there's a slight increase, but remember that we've stabilised as well. So yes, the prices are set to increase, which includes the price of logs. Yeah,
it's very difficult, isn't it, to try and pin these things down, because I think we were talking off camera, and I think you mentioned the a chip situation, which obviously goes into electrical goods, boilers, electrical systems, electrical control systems, and of course cars. And with the cars, last year in particular, we had a great shortage of cars, but I'm not sure it's not just the dealers trying to carry on that sort of situation at the moment, because what happens now is they tell you it's a 40, 50, 60 week wait, but then in 2 weeks they suddenly find you the model that you want and whatever. So you're never quite sure how accurate and how easy it is to pin these things down to a programmed time thing. And with a developer, of course, the moment he puts his spade in the ground and starts digging, you can't really stop when you're halfway up a block, can you?
Absolutely. Very uncertain times.
Very uncertain. Okay, now how wide is this shortage spreading? Does it, for instance, carry on to steel that's in construction industry? Does it carry on to glass?
Well, glass, as you know, it takes a lot of energy to produce, so that will be under restriction, I'm sure. With steel, if you consider HS2, the government won't stop procurement. So they would have, with HS2, I know via contacts that they would have bought a lot of materials up front. So they seem to have the lion's share of that, perhaps.
So they'd have bought forward contracts on?
They would have, absolutely.
I have to tell you, HS2 is not my favourite subject. I mean, I just think it's an absolute waste of money. I don't know what's wrong with a Zoom call, to be honest. But because I think the net effect of HS2, well, when it was going to come into London, it was just brought a lot of people from the North and Midlands down to London. I don't think there'd be many going the other way. But of course, now the situation is it's not coming into London for another 10 years or 15 years, is it? So that's a difficult one. But just on this business of forward buying, are all these building materials just treated like sort of commodities, and do they have their forward markets? And
very much so. It's a commodity business and also a logistics business, which was affected during COVID times. You could quite often get the product, but you couldn't get the ships and the trucks to transport it. So it is very much, it has to be considered a commodity business.
I mean, you mentioned, again, coming out of Ukraine, of course, the Black Sea ports are effectively shut. So I would have imagined that for a lot of the Eastern European countries exporting building materials, particularly timber and that kind of thing, they would have normally gone through Ukraine, wouldn't they?
They would indeed. So the costs are...
So it's not just the Ukraine problem,
it's not at all. I mean, if you consider that the price is coming down from Ukraine, we've managed to negotiate better rates, but the price of a truck bringing that is significant. So that's added more pressure.
Yeah. Well, of course, we saw that in COVID, didn't we? When the price of containers, people were saying, oh, I'm paying £2,000 to get a container from China to here. And
it was up to 11, actually.
11,000 now, is it?
Yeah, well, it was 11, but it's come down now considerably.
Right.
So that was the general bottleneck due to COVID and other reasons. So now it's come right down. I don't know the exact price, but it will be at least half.
Okay, so that indicates there might be some easing and something to look forward to this year.
Oh, I think so. I think that, despite, a very difficult time, I do think that certainly the UK, London will continue to build.
Okay, now coming back to, again, actual construction, we've seen in Russia in the past, they have gone into countries and they have decimated that countries and then offered, I presume, for the appropriate remuneration to rebuild those areas. Is that going to be affected by these sanctions? Is it going to stop Russia making sort of reparations where necessary?
Well, hopefully things will sort out and we can bring this dreaded war to an end. But certainly, I mean, the whole world was reliant upon Russia, and including the UK, obviously. So it's had a really tough effect on us, on supplies, and not just timber, but also steel.
And how do you really think it's affected Russia?
20% down on timber sales is a figure that I've read in the industry news. It's obviously affected a lot of people, but I don't think it's affecting Mr. P.
No. So it really is a two-tier society, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's quite interesting. Now, if we just sort of move on slightly, just focus on the UK for a moment. As I said to you earlier, I speak with developers all the time, and I'm seeing developers around here starting to stall projects because of the uncertainty of material costs. Do you see that situation lasting, or do you think in a year's time we'll be saying, what was all that about?
I perhaps wouldn't agree a year, but I can see why any developer, considering the dramatic situation we have at the moment, would be sitting on their hands and would be, if you consider interest rates and everything else. So it's, I would think that off the top of my head, it'll be at least a year before they start getting more confident.
Okay. Now, that's then, let's say, the final bit of this half of the show. Let's just talk about the dreaded interest rate. I mean, I go back many, many years, and I can remember thinking and being taught, in fact, that, while interest rates were under 10%, they were fine. That was the sort of psyche of it all. But we've had a whole generation now that have been used to 0.25%, 0.5%, whatever, and are really reeling from these interest rate costs now, even at 4.5%. How is that affecting the construction supply industry?
It's a combination of a lethal cocktail, but potentially, if you consider all of the challenges, significant challenges that developers have got. And it takes a very brave person to be a developer, as you well know, and even to be a contractor.
Brave or stupid, one of the two.
Well, look, we're up against it. We're in unique times, and we all have our own personal opinions on this, and where we're at with government as well, and what's going to happen, and what's been happening more recently with our government. So there's going to be some significant change, I should imagine. I've got my own predictions, of course, but
come on,
what will happen? Well, it's I think that the current government had every opportunity to prove themselves, and I don't think they have. So we need a change.
I think austerity just went on far too long, didn't it? With little forethought about the future. I think that's the basic problem.
I'm looking forward to a new setup, as it were.
Well, beginning with L.
Could be.
Could be. Right. Okay. Well, look, Richard, that's all we've got time for in this half of the show. So join me again after the break, where I'll continue conversation with Richard about the construction industry prospects. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Matters. Joining me is the Honourable Richard Evans, founder of Octavius GB and Anglo-Eastern Timber Alliance, our expert on construction costs today. So welcome back, Richard. Richard, we've talked in part 1 about the difficulties, the shortages, the sanctions, where materials are coming from. Obviously, there's going to be concentrated focus on supply areas. I don't know where they are, perhaps Ukraine, perhaps Scandinavian countries, perhaps China. But how are they going to get distributed around the world to these hotspots of reconstruction that we're inevitably going to have?
Good question. I would say, for example, the tragedy in Turkey, a lot of the materials will be retained naturally. They'll also have to import as well. So that will take a lot of attention and pressure off or on. And I would say that Sweden, as you know, for example, has always been incredibly strong on timber. They don't have an issue with transport. Certainly coming from out of Ukraine, it's incredibly expensive to send a truck from Ukraine to the UK. So they're going to have to think of new initiatives to improve logistics.
Richard, look, wherever these materials are going to come from, effectively they've got to be coordinated by somebody or some country that's going to take the lead in this, obviously. I mean, I think there'll be many people, many entrepreneurs around the world who want to take advantage of this. demand, shall we say. But I'm just thinking about the logistics of this, and I just wonder what the route out of Ukraine is. Is it by road? Ships seem to be out of the question at the moment, don't they? So road haulage is notoriously expensive, is it not?
It is indeed, but they're having to get, for example, the mills are going to have to be more realistic, the timber mills, on what they're charging to be competitive with the country's rates. So sending by truck is, well, you know, the price of diesel is expensive. So they're going to have to be more realistic on the actual cost of the product to balance that off with the haulage cost.
Yes, no, I'm thinking in Ukraine, I'm guessing that many of the railway lines have been destroyed.
No railways and no ports. It doesn't help at all. No. So without that, then they're in stuck. Okay. So they're having to send by road, which is very expensive.
Now, will this refocus, is it big enough, this problem, to refocus the concentration of wealth? For instance, is Sweden suddenly going to become a super economy, or is, I don't know, Norway going to become a super economy? Is it big enough to alter these structures?
Well, China, I mean, it's a huge, obviously a huge opportunity for them. And there's many new products that are coming out, for example, modified timbers that we're responsible for bringing to the country.
Do explain what a modified timber is.
The particular modified timber that we have can be used pretty much for everything, including structural, for windows, and it's built up over layers of using timber, and not Russian birch, by the way.
Right.
And it's glued together, right. So it's incredibly strong,
like a laminate.
A laminate, and very versatile, and you can, and it's a unique one, the one that we're bringing. So it's there is a huge opportunity for China in this, of course.
Haven't China got enough opportunities?
Yeah, well, they're getting more and more, and they're good at what they do.
Yeah. And is that going to change the nature of construction? Are we going to go to more of these created products to build? And the reason I ask that is I go back many, many years, we suddenly came across timber frame buildings, didn't we? Which all of a sudden were just, no, you can't borrow money if you're going to use timber frame, have to stop. But I just see in one or two journals we're going back that way, aren't we? So is this the job for your new timber?
Yeah, I think we should. I mean, at the moment, to get funding for timber frame projects is really challenging. And so hopefully within a couple of years that will change, but I don't know the answer to that. But hopefully it will be, of course, and a huge opportunity for the Baltic states and Scandinavia.
Well, every news bulletin that I see, there's something about China. Either we're getting upset because they're investing in our nuclear business, or they're doing this or doing that, or they've got TikTok and that's ruining the world. But they're certainly becoming more and more influential. Do you see them becoming an accepted supplier of building materials worldwide?
Well, they should be, because a lot of Londoners use their materials.
But should be and will be. It's two different things.
Look, we hadn't traded with China until we broke ties with Russia for obvious reasons, and particularly when it became illegal. Working with China, our experience is taken us a year and a half to bed down those relationships, to get used to, and to build trust. So it's created for us an opportunity to work with China, and certainly so far they've done a great job. So I think it really it's convinced us for the time being that that's a good path.
I suppose the danger would be if Russia and China really get into bed, and then China sort of say, well, we're not supplying countries that don't support Russia or support us in this joint effort with the war. It comes back to that wretched war again, doesn't it?
It does indeed. So let's hope that it doesn't come to that.
I do hope so. Now, looking at what's happened in Turkey with the unfortunate earthquake there's been a lot of criticism about the building standards in Turkey, and there are investigations going on. Who's going to pick up the strain there? Is Turkey strong enough to rebuild its own towns, or is Western money going to be needed, do you think?
As you know, they've got some incredible manufacturing plants there. And for those that have not been affected on the other side, they're in a very strong position. That could have an effect on the UK. But let's see. But I should imagine they'll need some Western support.
Yeah, I would have thought so. But again, you know, huge construction projects are going to be needed there, and that again is going to sort of aggravate the shortages that we're experiencing now, aren't they?
I believe it will affect us. There's huge opportunity there, of course, but they are supported by other countries.
Yeah. Well, look, we've got Turkey that's going to, in certain areas, need a lot of rebuilding. We've got Ukraine that, you know, when you see the news stories, I think we've both got connections in Ukraine, so we understand what's going on there and the absolute devastation that's gone on there. They're going to need to rebuild, as they are even in Syria, which is, you know, got problems for different reasons, but nevertheless has been destroyed in many, many parts. You do just wonder if this isn't going to just push the cost of living crisis, and particularly cost of home crisis across Europe terribly.
With Ukraine, none of us know when it's going to finish, and that's the issue. And how many people will go back if you considered how many displaced people, and what are they going to build, and where are they going to build it? And I'm sure they've had no shortage of offers of support,
not least from the Kremlin. I mean, did you see, I don't know whether you saw the news program, they discovered in the Kremlin a complete architect's drawing of how to, I think it was Sevastopol, I think they were going to, or Mariupol, I don't know which, but they've got a complete Russian program for rebuilding the thing in sort of usual communist type blocks and, you know, very authoritarian, but nevertheless plans to do it. And they were so surprised to have received this. But that's what Russia did in Georgia, wasn't it? They flattened it and then offered to go in and rebuild it.
Yeah.
So it you know, you can watch these news programs and think, oh, well, thank heaven we live in London, but it's going to hurt at some point, isn't it?
Of course. Yeah, the impact is significant.
Okay, well, look, Richard, I'd like to finish on this program by just asking you what you really think the future is for UK construction, for development in this town in particular, in London in particular, because this is where the concentration of development is. Are we going to have a bad couple of years, or are we going to get over this?
I think certainly we'll get over it, because London always does. But you can understand why any developer would be extremely cautious, not only the cost of materials, the uncertainty, but we have stabilised. Those costs will increase. And I think that to be a developer, obviously you have to be incredibly courageous and experienced. So it is, I think that give it a couple of years and we'll see some improvement. And London is always rebuilding.
I suppose we've been rebuilding since the 40s, haven't we?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, look, Honourable Richard Evans, thank you very much for coming in today.
Lovely to see you.
It's really interesting to have your take on all these things. It really does matter to us all when we talk about construction costs and development. It is our lives, it is the cost of housing, and it is the cost of living. So again, Richard, thank you very much. That's all from me, Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Matters.